Welcome once again. My name is Andy. I'm the quality manager at the Minster Centre, and as I said, sometimes I get to do fun things like this. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm going to pass to Martine now just to briefly introduce herself.
Okay, so yeah, I'm Martine Renoux. I'm the author of the book You Are Not a Doormat and You Never Were. I'm also a trainer at the Minster Centre, where I teach third years and masters training weekend on domestic abuse. I qualified at the Minster Centre in 1987. Yeah, don't calculate. It's just like a long time ago. And I've been a therapist ever since in many different organizations, including programs for perpetrators, but victims of abuse, rape, and violence in the NHS and in various charitable trusts as well.
Thank you, Martine.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to be here. And I want to thank you again for hosting this conversation, Andy, and the Minster Centre. And thank you for turning up and being here tonight, everyone, as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So the next 30 minutes or so, Martine and I are just going to have an organic conversation. We haven't planned it around her book. And then we're going to turn it over, opportunity for those who are here to ask any questions that they would like to. Thank you, Martine, for giving me something interesting to read. And I guess, it seems the obvious one to begin with, but what was it that made you want to write the book?
All right. So I've been using these ideas in my therapy work and in my teaching for many, many years. And quite regularly, clients would say to me, "Oh, can I read a book about this?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't know of any." And students would say, "Can I read a book?" Well, you can get to access some academic papers, but not a book per se, or the book that's been written on the response-based approach, which is the book is based on the ideas of the response-based approach. It's very, very expensive academic book. So I thought there was a bit of a gap there, and then I just came to have a bit more time in my working life as I kind of quit a job, and I just thought, oh, maybe it's time for me to write it, and so here it is. I've written it, and hopefully, hopefully I've done a good job. I think that's my hope.
Well, we're glad you did. And you've woven all those years, for people who haven't had the chance to read it yet, you've woven all those years of being a therapist into it, in that you have you talk about a number of your clients throughout it, and many case studies, which are particularly engaging. Who did you see the audience? You've kind of touched on this, but who did you see the audience of the book as being for?
Yeah. I mean, I first started writing a book for trainees and therapists, and it wasn't quite my voice. I felt that I really wanted to talk to the general public. I really thought these ideas needed to go to the general public, and then therapists included could also read it. So I was hoping to really reach a very, very wide range of people. But anyone in the helping profession, whether social workers, therapists, or in the legal profession even, they might find it of interest. But yeah, just every one of us who've experienced abuse in any shape or form, even from mild disrespect, mild forms of insults to severe violence, I hope they can really find something useful, nourishing, and supportive in the book. And something to challenge as well. I think there's challenge the common ideas, which tend to be quite negative about victims of abuse. Even the term victims is a problem in some circles, so it's just really trying to promote respect and kindness towards anyone who has been victimized, and to challenge the many negative ideas associated with this issue.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you touched on there, when I picked it up, I thought, okay, Martine's written a book, it concerns domestic abuse, that's what I'm going into. But as soon as I started it felt like it also talks a lot about other types of abuse. It's kind of a broader focus, isn't it? Do you want to say a word about that?
Yeah, I mean, completely. All these ideas apply to people who have been bullied at work. In fact, the first case that I talk about is somebody who's been bullied at work by her manager. There's cases on rape. There's child abuse. There's mentions about murder as well. So some of it is quite heavy topics. So, and just a kindly, warning if you do need to take a break. Although I'm not going to be describing intense violence in this talk, but if you need to take a break or you find the topic a little bit too much, please, just do what you need to do to look after yourself. And I use these ideas in my work for any issues. So it could be also like, homophobia, Islamophobia, misogyny. So any attacks on how integrity, how dignity, any forms of violence or disrespect, I think you might really gain something from the book, because hopefully it will open your reflection to include many aspects of your experience and to see it differently.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I can't remember if I said this to you in an email, but I read some books recently around adult bullying, and in particular workplace bullying. Right. And I thought, in a way, your book was actually, I'm not just saying this, your book was actually better than those for some of like the practical things it was giving. So thinking around what else to ask you with this, Martine, I guess a key thing of the book that you have right up front is this idea, and I have to say I'd never thought of it this way, this idea that everybody resists. Yeah. And you give a number of situations where perhaps we wouldn't traditionally think of a person as resisting in that circumstance, but having read the book, come away, see it quite differently. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. And people often, after reading the book, tell me, oh, I can see it everywhere now. Of course. I mean, obviously, I think resistance to abuse is not often talked about. So we very often don't have it on our radar. So accounts of violence, you describe what the perpetrators do, but you very rarely describe what the victim does. You might describe their suffering to some degree, but not what they do and how they respond. And the premise of the book is an observation. So it's not a theory, it's the observation that whenever people are badly treated, they resist. It doesn't mean they resist 24/7. It doesn't mean they resist every single minute of the day, but they will carry out acts of resistance. And resistance, if I summarize it, it's any effort. And that's really important. It's a notion of effort. It doesn't have to succeed to be called resistance. And this is a dictionary definition. So any effort to stop, limit, or prevent, or defy abuse and violence. And in fact, in the book, I give a couple of long lists of words to try to define and to give words to help us understand the scope of resistance. So I thought I might just read you a few here. That's the only time I will read. So it's any effort to stop, limit, prevent, defy, as I just mentioned. Defiance is a very specific of a type of resistance which is always really heart-wrenching for me, because often when clients have told me about their defiance, it's really they were at the end of what they could bear and at the end of hope. They had lost everything. Nothing else could be done to them, so they were going to make a stand, and quite a dramatic, strong stand to the abuser, and they didn't care about the risk. But resistance is often much more prudent than this, and is shown through many different types of actions. So any effort to interrupt violence and abuse, to counteract, to strive against, to oppose, to refuse to participate in, refusing to participate in, to repel, to evade, any effort to expose, to foil, hinder, frustrate or thwart abuse and control is a form of resistance. Any effort to fight off, push back, disobey, question, challenge, disapprove, denounce, plead with. Pleading is a form of resistance. Ignore or hold the abuser responsible and accountable is a form of resistance. I mean, did all of you know how much vocabulary there is to describe these various forms of resistance? And it's not all there in those lists. The appendix, the first appendix of the book, gives more words to give a sense of resistance. And so resistance, very often I remember someone during a training said, oh, but thoughts are not actions. But I think we can resist in thoughts. So we can resist physically when we push back physically. But sometimes just even to counteract an insult in our mind that said, no, I'm not stupid. Even if we don't speak it, when we have it in mind, we're doing something. We are articulating a response. We're articulating an objection. Then I also talk about, mental resistance. I talk about psychological resistance. So any attempt to maybe disconnect you from your loved ones, every time psychologically you're going to remember what it's like to feel loved or connect with really good relationships that you have with people, that's going to nourish you emotionally. So that's, I mean, I would think of that as a form of resistance. You can also think of, spiritual resistance. And I first came across this notion of spiritual resistance when I watched the film. I don't know if any one of you saw it. It's a very hard film to watch, but it's from Tina Turner, What Love Got to Do with It. And one of the steps she took was to begin a Buddhist practice of meditation. And I think that is just more than spiritual attainment. This is also saying that she deserves serenity. It's an effort to reclaim her serenity and to create peace and to create strength in her, or in a connection, in a spiritual connection. So I think that's a form of spiritual resistance. So resistance takes many, many shapes or forms. And the more we understand that, the more we can validate, honor, and appreciate those actions. And give that feedback to our clients, our friends, our family who are in these kind of situations.
With that in mind, Martine, you make me think of Jermaine's sort of story in the book, which is quite a poetic, and something you say also at one point in the book is around, being a child and your ability to kind of resist things and stop things happening it can be very different to, like a fully grown human being. Would you be comfortable sort of sharing Jermaine's story with us?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I can see her, this particular client telling me this story. So her parents were actually incredibly controlling and quite abusive verbally. They berated her constantly. And they also had this obsession about cleaning. And so they would force her to clean her room thoroughly. And every evening they would inspect her room very carefully. And then as we were talking, I was saying, oh, what did you have any moment of peace, or what was going on, or how did you maybe express some of your discontent about their behavior? And so she started thinking a bit, and she said, oh, I remember when I was about maybe 10, 11 or 12, I don't know exactly, I went through a phase where at night, after they went to their bedroom, I knew they would never come out. So they would come and do the inspection, and then I would be left alone. So at that point, she had a moment of freedom, a moment of peace that she could count on. It was a safe moment for her. And she said, I remember I just got up one evening, and on the walls, on the shelves, on the desk where they would inspect for dirt, I began to write with my finger all the things they'd said to me during the day and how much I didn't like it one bit. And I just wrote and wrote on the walls in the air. And I just remember, and I have that again, that shiver, like that kind of thing. Wow, how do you come up with that? So she was writing an invisible record in a place where her parents were looking for invisible dirt. And this record, her parents would actually face it as they would inspect the furniture again in the following morning. That is just so witty. And to me, that was also so poignant. And so, an invisible record is still a record. A silent voice is still a voice. They live in the teller, and they speak about this little girl's determination to make a statement, to say something, to oppose her parents, and to articulate that in a way that remains safe. And yet with that lovely witty aspect of it, that they would be facing it the next morning. Yeah, so to this day, I still find that very moving.
Thank you for sharing that. So we were talking around this key theme of the book, that you didn't do nothing. And as you said, you've been a therapist since 87. And then there's a line in the book where you say, I've never met anyone who has not resisted in some shape or form, never. So, that's strong. And then you move into exploring blame. And I find that particularly interesting because when I opened the book, I thought, okay, I've worked with people in the past who've been subjected to domestic abuse, many years of working in homelessness services. I'm going to find this book interesting, but I'm coming to it as a sympathetic reader. It's probably not going to challenge kind of any underpinning beliefs that I have. But I found myself quite surprised by sort of things that I'd got wrong in the past over the years, to throw myself under the bus here. So if we talk a little bit about blame, and there's a lot of things I could ask you here, but maybe interested on your thoughts around the word victim.
Yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, the word victim has become a bad word. And I have clients who come and say to me, I'm not a victim, because they do not associate with a certain, bias or picture or identity of victim. I mean, victim is not an identity. It's the only word we have. That's a problem, you see. When we warp it, it's actually the only word we have to describe someone who has been harmed through somebody else's actions, on purpose, with intention, or but from accident. So how can having been harmed make you wrong? How can that make you bad or wrong or weak? We can all be harmed in such many circumstances. So I think reclaiming that word, and I think the feminists are very good at thinking this word is absolutely fine, and the police use this word because it's also a legal term. So I really wish we could think that actually victim is someone who at some point in their life has been harmed. The same way as in perpetrators, it's at some point someone who has used violence or abuse against another. It doesn't define your whole personality. It's not a T-shirt that you wear. So yes, unfortunately, there's lots of negative association with it, that victims are passive, they're compliant, they are complicit somehow in their victimization. They have psychological problems that leads them to be victimized or choose abusers. So there's a lot of literature on pathologizing ideas, which end up being quite blaming too. Pathologizing is attributing mental illness or mental difficulty or psychological difficulties. Blaming is attributing responsibility for the actions of the abusers or for yourself being in that situation. So these are kind of similar aspects of the same thing. All of them, they don't feel good. They don't feel good to victims at all.
For those who haven't had a chance to see the book yet, Martine's got a really good illustration in the middle. It's a younger man, very big guy. It looks like he drinks his protein shakes and maybe enjoys boxing. Opposite, an older gentleman, sort of hunched over, looking quite frail. And then you turn the page over and it's the same two characters, but the older gentleman is pointing a gun at the younger man, and the younger person that you traditionally perhaps think of as very strong is looking very scared. Interesting kind of how you illustrated this idea of being strong, but also being put into the place of being a victim. which kind of maybe brings us on a little bit as well to talking about some of the myths we might hear around domestic abuse. So I mean, two that everybody in this call has probably heard at some point, the "why don't they just leave" kind of quote, and the "why didn't you leave sooner" sort of quote. Would you be comfortable talking to those for a few minutes, sharing your thoughts on
Yeah.
those with us?
Yes, of course. I mean, all these are very blaming. I mean, very often you hear that from journalists asking, "Oh, why didn't you leave?" Even of people who have left incidentally, which I quite find that interesting. But yeah, it's a big question. I think it's very difficult for anyone to know that someone is being battered, controlled, or that their partner is abusing them and berating them. I think it's very difficult to bear. And sometimes it's just a little bit easier to turn to the victim and ask them to do something. But every situations are very complex, and I hope that in the book I describe the complexity. I mean, if I said to any one of you here, okay, just go home, just pick up a bag, pack up what you can, and take it and go, just leave. How impossible does that seem? And you leave with your bag, and you may never be able to return and gather the rest of your property. That the perpetrator might destroy that, before you even return. So leaving your home and leaving also a relationship with someone that you may still love, that maybe he's a good father to the children, that maybe has some good sides, that maybe actually provides. There's all sorts of reasons why it's very difficult to leave. And then, of course, there are the most difficult cases where, leaving is very, very dangerous. And victims of abuse and women are more likely to be murdered after they leave than when they live with their partner. So just to say to leave, I think, unfortunately, gives, really, is a blame to victims, but without very much understanding about all the circumstances. That means that they might not leave. Yeah, so I mean, I could expand a lot on this for the reasons for staying. And sometimes staying is the safest choice, and sometimes it's a sacrifice for the welfare of your children so that they finish their exams or that they have access to books and computers. Because when you pick up your children and go, you are likely to be thrown into poverty or into huge financial difficulties, at least for some time. So that, yeah, there's all sorts of reasons. I think of these very quick judgments are very detrimental, unfortunately, and unfortunately they're very common.
Thank you. You do. I suppose through this conversation, people get a bit of a flavour of these subjects in the book, but you do a really good job in the book of kind of expanding on that.
Yeah.
Which leads me to go on. Sorry.
No, it's the same with leaving a job. People say, "Oh, why don't you just leave your job?" But if you have a harassing boss who's bullied you, your confidence is going to really be lower, understandably, and you may be afraid of not getting a good reference. You may be afraid. You may be so exhausted and upset and distraught that you have very little energy to look for a job. And if you manage to get an interview, you're not going to be necessarily able to promote the best of your skills when you're feeling so down and hurt and in such suffering. So even like, oh, just leave your job and find another one. When you're feeling so trapped in your job, it's also difficult. So I think leaving, whether it's an abusive boss, an abusive partner, or abusive parents, how do you leave your parents, or your family home? It's incredibly difficult and hard.
Thank you, Martine. And as you said at the beginning, you found your voice with this book in terms of you started off thinking it was going to be more of just a pure academic book, and you've actually written something that's can be picked up and anybody can get something from it. I guess it's interesting. It was most apparent to me reading it, this idea of the difference between responses and effects that you
Right.
mentioned at the beginning. That's clearly like there's some academic language with it, but you put it in real kind of, even I can understand it, sort of terms. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about that, and maybe in relation to Jenny's Jenny's situation?
Yeah. So I think maybe I'll start with Jenny's case, really, to illustrate it, because often I think that speaks more. So, I mean, when Jenny first came to see me, she was one of the most scared clients I had walking into my office. She was really quite terrified and very, yeah, you know, she was bracing herself for a really difficult session. And so she started telling me that she was very, very upset with a court case that was on the news. She couldn't sleep. She was obsessed with it. She wanted to read everything about it. And it was a court case of a man who had murdered his girlfriend. And she, you know, she lost appetite. And so she was obviously very distressed. And she really just, so then she told me that she had had a very violent partner. And so I tried to engage in, wow, you know, are you safe from him? That's often I do a safety assessment and a risk assessment. Are you safe from him? Yes, he doesn't know where I live. He's abroad. This is fine. And I said, well, how did you manage to leave him? And somehow she found that very difficult to really respond to and to answer. And she kept telling me about the effect. You know, it's just really affecting me, and I've got such bad effects from this. And, you know, I'm still suffering, and the program is triggering me. So she had all this language, which we're very familiar with, which indicates that she was being done to, you know, and that she was really impacted and suffering. And I was trying to engage her in a conversation about her responses, how she had responded, what she was doing, feeling, thinking. And she really didn't quite go with this. And then at some point she said, oh, this is, you know, I must be involved with this partner because I was sexually abused as a child. And that's why, you know, maybe that's why I chose him, which is also another common idea, which I tend to challenge with clients. That, you know, that's not something I particularly agree with, this, you know, automatic links. And so I said, well, what happened with the child abuse? What happened? And so she described that an uncle had asked her to come into his room where he was staying with, you know, in the family home during holidays. And she had no reason to not trust him. She went into the room and he exposed her to sexualized images of adults having sex. And she was so shocked. And I said to her, what did you do? And she said, oh, she didn't expect my question. It looked like no one had asked her that question. So what did you do? Oh, I don't know. I was shocked. I said, did you stay there or did you run away? No, I ran away. Okay, so as quick as you could, you just managed to find your way out. And then I said, and after that, you know, how did you relate to him? Did you feel able to tell your parents? No, not at all. I couldn't tell my parents. Later on, I told them. Okay, and how was it going to be being in the house with him? I completely avoided him. I had nothing to do with him, and I refused to speak to him to such extent that my parents called me rude. So why are you being rude? But I would not say goodbye to him. I thought, wow, so you really showed your protest against what he'd done to you and how you really held it against him. And not only that, but you made quite a public stand because you do this in front of your parents. Yeah, and they kept asking me to say goodbye to him. Did you? No. So she refused to say goodbye to him. This is resistance. This is just obvious protest. Having your voice saying no, you know, you did something wrong to me and I'm not your friend anymore, type of thing. And so I said to Jenny, so can you see all this are your responses? You could not, you know, these are not the effect of the abuse. And then at that point, I kind of zipped it, which sometimes is difficult for me, but I could see she was thinking it through. And then she said, oh my gosh, this is effing brilliant. I get you now. I get you. She had noticed I was asking her about her responses, and she had noticed she was talking about effects, but then she got it. And she said, I get it. So you're saying that, yeah, that's me. I said, yeah, and if we only talk about the effect of abuse, we can't come to this awareness of all the actions that you took. And many of these actions were making a stand against your in-course abuse. And so she came back the following week and she said, oh my gosh, you know, I thought about this all night. talk to my friends, and I'm not obsessed with that court case anymore. I really get what you mean. So this was really an important shift for her, to think about her responses rather than to think of the effect. So I don't know if you all got that difference between effect and response, but the effect of violence can only be negative. You cannot say the effect of violence was that I started to become creative, write poetry, and feel really positive about myself. That doesn't match. So when we talk into effect, we objectify the victims by, in a way, construing them as recipient of effects, as passive. But when we talk in response, we engage them with an awareness of their own agency, of their own humanity. So the little story I said, just to add in case you just want some clarification, if I kick a stone, the direction of the stone and the speed of the stone comes from my kick. It's my kick that gives the energy to the stone. Can the stone respond? Can a stone respond? No. Why can't it respond? Because it's got no life in it. But we are biological beings. We have life. And the biology dictionary, they talk about stimuli and response. The word effect does not appear in a biology dictionary. So when we talk about the effect of violence, and the violence had that effect or that impact, when we link effect to any thoughts, behaviors, physical emotions, and so on, we are objectifying the person. That should be called response. Now, and then students say, but there are some effects of violence. I say, yeah, poverty is an effect of violence. Children not being able to study so well is an effect of violence. Death is an effect of violence. So poor school results, you could say, although it's an understandable response. So to be clear about this is really important in staying in touch with the victim as an agent, and to validate them as a human being with energy and motivation. I don't know if that's, yeah.
Thank you, Martine. And it's useful as well in the book, you've got kind of like a little quiz to sort of help understand what is the difference between what the effect is when somebody does something to you, and then the agency that you kind of execute when you do something.
How did you find the quiz, Andy?
I got full marks. Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
He explains it well. But I slowed down at that point in the book. That was a part I had to kind of slow down. And when I thought back into the past, I thought I would definitely, or have definitely, fallen into that trap of focusing on what the impact of something somebody has done, rather than kind of what I did afterwards.
Yeah, we all do it, and all the books are written like this. All the books talk about the impact and the effect, the after effect, the aftermath. They all do that. It's very common language, and one of the most difficult aspects of using this approach is to change that language. I mean, it's really about changing grammar, and that's what I spent a lot of time listening and paying attention to how I speak, and how I speak with clients or friends or family, and it's just changing that language. It's very hard. We do it without even noticing, using all these words. So absolutely.
Thank you. Well, there's two big sections of the book we didn't get to cover, which were about what have you been told is wrong with you, which is about mental health oppression, and how some things of there that I really got a lot from, like this thing of I'm drawn to abusive partners, people who have that and how that's a myth, and also the final section, which is maybe your next book if you wanted to write it at some point, about those who abuse you, the chapter is called.
Oh yes.
But as much as I want to jump into that, I'm conscious of time, so okay. I think now is probably the point that enough from me, sort of thing, and we give other people a chance to ask questions and contribute. If you would like to raise a hand, there's this little button at the top of the screen. You can do it like that, and I can invite you to talk. You're very welcome to put a question in the chat as well. Yeah, over to you, folks. Does anybody have anything that they would like to ask Martine? Alex. Go for it, Alex.
Hi, Andy. Hi, Martine, and everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm thinking about response, and I'm thinking about a particular client of mine, and what happens when the response is to shut down or to be quiet to avoid conflict.
Yeah.
And then when we explore what would be a possible response, there is the threat of stonewalling or violence from the partner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, it's really important to have a wide understanding of the scope of resistance, because actually refusing to join in, refusing to speak, withdrawing, I think all these are ways of, it's getting to the intention behind the behavior. So it could be, well, for perpetrators, it's a way to punish. You avoid, you don't talk, you ignore. But when you are victimized, it could be a way of blocking, a way of refusing to participate, a way of refusing to show happiness or participating. But I think that very often, when I teach this approach, I've had people who said, well, can't you tell them how to resist or how to do things? And then one thing that I never do is to tell people or suggest ways to resist, because it is such a unique situations they're facing, and only they can know how they feel inside and what resources they have inside in order to make a stand. And there will be some days where they can't, and some days when they will. And so there will be so many different ways. And I remember, I hope that speaks to your point, but I remember listening to a phone conversation. I was working in an office and listening to phone conversation of a therapist who was telling a client, well, assert yourself. Assert yourself. Do tell your husband to not talk to you like this. And the next I hear is that this woman, the client, did assert herself, and her husband slapped her hard. Of course, because it's, you resist, but there's a response of the perpetrators, which is to suppress your resistance. They don't want you to assert yourself or to have a voice. And so resisting is incredibly dangerous sometimes, and it's always a risk. You don't know the outcome. So it's when also clients tell me, oh, I stopped, I don't say anything. But did you used to say something? Yeah, I used to. So you may get a sense of what they're doing now, but how have they got to make those choices? Because when they did speak up, they got slapped or they got downgraded or humiliated or insulted. So people don't resist the same way every time. They build up, different approaches and try different ways. And often in families, you have like, oh, I used to really fight my father and try to really get between my father and my mother. On the other hand, my sister or my brother, they would stay in their room, never engaged, and read books all day long. And these are both forms of resistance. To remove yourself, to flee from an abuser, that's pretty wise. But I wouldn't judge or condemn either someone who puts themselves between and try to stop the violence of the assault. So I think it's trying to understand, trying to really widen our grasp and understanding of his human behaviors. I think that's really important.
Thank you, Martine. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, but I think maybe on the back of what you were saying, I think I need to add that actually this client also had quite an abusive upbringing. So the way he behaves is something, is sort of like was actually told like that he needs to be seen but not heard. So and every time he would speak or resist in a way, even as a child, that will come with a punishment. So it became so entrenched that this is his default way of being, except for very rare occasion when he was pushed into a corner. But the result of that is that he's in a very when it's not an abusive relationship, I learned that from you, he's with a very abusive partner.
Well done. Yeah, it's but I mean, I don't know if that's a result of his behaviors that he is with an abusive partner, but he probably is responding to this abusive partner the same way that he responded as a child. And it makes sense if it saved him when he was a child. You know, and sometimes we do things out of fear. The intention is not necessarily to stop or prevent abuse. We're just petrified. And so we freeze. And so it's an experience of fear. But it may also be that he might have avoided a few beatings by being very quiet. And therefore, there could be an element of tactics or strategy to avoid beatings. And so it makes sense that if that strategy has worked somewhat in the past, that he would try that again with this current partner.
Yeah, but it leaves him in a vicious cycle where nothing changed. So he doesn't, I mean, he's not happy. He does feel that he is a doormat in a way. He actually says that, but not in these words. But
yeah, similar. Well, I don't know. I mean, you may want to recommend the book, and you may begin to explore, because I don't think these are signs of being a doormat. To try to prevent abuse by staying quiet, it's actually a good strategy.
Yeah.
You know, it's and also, why would he take risks? You know, if he knows his partner is going to be abusive, it's thinking about, are there areas in his life somewhere else where he can take a bit more risk? So sometimes I share that story. I used to have a boyfriend long time ago who didn't have a sense of humor. He took himself very seriously. So I would crack a joke, and so he wouldn't laugh, or I would be a little bit playful and he wouldn't join in. I stopped cracking jokes, and I stopped playing around and fooling around. And you know, I noticed that, because why crack a joke to someone who doesn't laugh? And after I managed to get rid of him, and that wasn't that easy, but I did. I remember being in a party, and then I had a joke came to mind. We were all watching Star Trek. I was a bit of a Trekkie, still I'm a bit really, but you know, we were all watching Star Trek. And then a joke came to mind, and I just hesitated saying it. I just and I thought, oh, what the heck? My boyfriend's not here. This is a group. This is a party. And so I cracked a joke, and everybody was roaring with laughter, you know, roaring with laughter. And then I was remembered for my sense of humor. But I could risk that again because it was a safe environment. And so sometimes some of the work that I do is help people to reclaim their self-expression, the one that they curtailed in order to face abuse, and to try to reclaim it and to find spaces and relationships when it would be safer for them to, well, maybe say what they think a bit more, maybe say they don't like something, or just try it a little bit because it would be safer. But it may be that with his partner, this is a good strategy.
Thank you for your question, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'm going to read Denise's comment because she makes a really good point about the practical kind of aspect of the book. Sorry, just coming over a cold, just coming out of it, about the practical aspect of the book. So I'm not sure it would be on the video if I don't read it. So I just want to read it to make sure we've got it. So Denise shares with us, not so much of a question, but a thank you. Having had the privilege of reading your book, I want to express my gratitude for its main message, that everyone resists in their own way. This is incredibly empowering. I also value the message around shame. I've been able to share the book's message with several others. For example, someone recently shared with me her story about leaving her abusive husband. She told me that she was asked, "Why did you stay?" So kind of something we touched on earlier. I could see she felt shame, but I was able to show her that she was actually preparing herself to leave all along, so acting with wisdom. I saw a renewed sense of power spread on her face and felt glad I could help her and see her own strength. It was great to have a book I could recommend. Thank you for sharing that, Denise.
Oh, thank you, Denise, for sharing that. That's really lovely. that's so much the aim of the book, that these ideas can be shared and used and help ripple, you know, that there could be a ripple effect in terms of supporting victims of abuse. Thank you.
Any more questions for Martine? Anyone? Feel free to raise a hand or to write something in the chat. Yeah, Sarita, go for it.
Hi, Martine. Thank you. Can you hear me actually?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarita. Yes.
So actually, I'm in the process of reading your book, so I have not finished it. But there was a line very early on, almost the introductory part of it, that really struck me. And you write, accepting and valuing our individuality is vital to feeling okay about ourselves. And that struck me because, and this is my question to you, when you talk to clients of perhaps different heritages or Asian values, etc., I wonder how you kind of approach that, because just in my own experience, culturally, the individual is not is something that's not really focused on. It's more the collective, and it takes it. I can imagine with a client, it would take a while to kind of overcome that before you even get to the issues. And so I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on that, because that line really, really struck me.
Yeah. I mean, I worked with I worked in an area of London where there was a lot of Asian people, and it was really assumed that Asian women didn't go to counselling for domestic abuse. Not true. When I kind of initiated a survey of the service, it was pretty proportionate to the population. So I did quite a big survey, and so actually, Asian women did come to counselling, but they didn't go to the Asian counselling services. They came to other services. So I think it shows that culturally you're right. I think in some culture, the trust about the confidentiality, or everyone knowing each other, and because they're more closely knit communities, is sometimes makes it difficult for people to access services. But I really try to stay very close to the person's value. And I think one example I say in the book is that for some Asian women I met, if they divorced their husband, their brothers and sisters could not marry. It would just be such a shame on the family. So it's not what I'm talking about is accepting your individuality in the way you respond, which is not necessarily acting, in a unidirectional way without caring about anybody else. And indeed, I think a lot of people sacrifice their well-being in order to protect, their children or their family or their siblings. And I think, again, that is something that, I think that needs to be honored and that to be understood. So, yeah, there are aspects of certain religions or communities or that makes it very, very difficult options are always narrow in many ways, but in some contexts, they are even narrower in terms of what is possible to do. And I think that needs to be respected. I mean, for me, that I respect that. And it's very heart-wrenching to hear stories like this, because there's a real sense of layers of entrapment. They're trapped by their husband or partners, but the family also says, no, the children need their fathers. No, your brothers and sisters. No, what would the community say? And so there's levels of entrapment that, women or men are dealing with. That's sometimes very heart-wrenching to see. Does that answer your question, or not really?
No, I was really struck by that, because it's almost, before you even peel away the layers of the onion, it's actually the core of why someone won't leave or why someone won't change their situation. Because if you don't value yourself as an individual, because if those values were not part of your upbringing, it's it's very hard to feel kind of your worth, if that makes sense. And I think that as a therapist, it kind of adds an additional layer of complexity. Not impossible, of course, but it's something that a therapist, I feel, should be very aware of when they are working with the client.
Yeah, I agree. But I think it's also valuing, I agree. And I'm thinking of the Chinese people I've worked with as well. It's very, very hard. I guess you get your sense of value from how well you are doing in the community or how well your parents are praising you. So you get senses of values maybe in different places. But yeah, it's much harder. That definitely. Yes, I agree. Yeah, I think you said it very well. I can't add to that. You said that very well. I think for me, it's always respecting and valuing every difference. I mean, when I give training, I said I never use this as techniques. I really try to be very present to the person, where they're at, what's going on for them, and understanding their context and how they view themselves. But you said it very well. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Sarita. Any other thoughts on anyone's mind? Any question for Martine? While you're having a chance to think, let me ask you, because, oh, no, Melanie, go on. People are sick of hearing my voice. Ask your question. Oh, I think you might still be on mute. I think you're still on mute, Melanie. Sorry.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I can't see you, Martine, so I don't know why. But no problem. I think you can see me. And I'm really, really struck by the importance of really emphasizing that those small acts of resistance are really important.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be something big, because people kind of have that notion that, if they didn't stop the abuse, then it wasn't successful.
Yeah.
A client came back to me after working with her, and she said that was so powerful, just thinking about the smaller acts of resistance.
Yeah.
And I kind of also thought about how pathologizing goes on in the wider system, really, because I worked with somebody that had been mugged at a bus stop. That was her words. The perpetrator grabbed her bag and she gave it to the perpetrator, which was an act of resistance. But when the victim support team came to see her at her home, they gave her advice about how she should hold the bag differently. How she should kind of be a bit more careful when she was walking down the street, which I found was a kind of bit of blame, really. Inadvertently. I'm sure it came from a very helpful position, but it just didn't seem very helpful to my client. And nor did it feel very helpful to my client to think about how she felt about it, because she knew she felt ashamed and guilty, and to go through those feelings again wasn't so helpful for her. So I think the response-based approach would be much more helpful for helping her in that time. But I've been really grateful to have all the ideas in a book that's up to date. Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome, Melanie. I mean, I think I talked just the first part of your comment was about, the very small acts of resistance, and I talk about micro resistance. And sometimes you can just raise an eyebrow to signify discontent about a comment, or freeze your face, or and it's just saying something. Refusing to smile for the happy family photograph when it's not a happy family. So I think, all these are really important to notice and value. I think that's right. And I think, the advice is really poorly timed, isn't it? If someone just has been mugged and their bags wrenched from them, and, to just say to them, well, next time, make sure you hold your bag like this. It's very poor timing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's a very poor timing indeed, really. And it just feels like a blame, totally. I mean, sometimes, you know, when I do this work, clients just get it, or friends as well. I've had conversation with friends and said, but look what you did there. And they say, oh, wow, yes. And with myself, you know, from events that happened to me long ago. And I thought, oh, what did I do? How did I respond? Ah, that's what I was doing. I wasn't doing nothing. I was trying to reclaim my peace of mind. I was trying to limit the disturbance on my day, you know. And that's really helpful as well. And sometimes, you know, it's one act of resistance that you get, and it doesn't seem to be making much difference. And you think, okay, well. And then I remember one woman. She was absolutely amazing, and she had very little show of emotions on her face, and she'd learned to do that, because if she showed emotion, her husband would not, you know, would use it against her. And he controlled everything she bought. But one day, pardon?
A very powerful act.
Yes, of concealing any expression. So so one day she really wanted a coat in a shop. It was on sale, but she really wanted the coat. And despite the many, you know, absolutely, you know, the message from the husband, do not dare buy clothes without me. I will buy your clothes for you. She went into the shop and she bought the coat.
Yay.
And I just said, wow, you know, what made you do that? And what were you thinking on the way as you were walking back home? And so she was preparing all sorts of strategies of what to tell him, how to justify. And I said, and how was it when you got home? I said, well, I just told him it was in the sales, and anyway, I needed a coat, so I just bought it. So she completely diminished the value of his coat she absolutely loved and hid that. And somehow her husband said, oh, okay, then. Just. Yeah. And so I just did, okay, we talked about that. There was one session, and we never went back again over things, and we talked about other things, the children or whatever. And then the last session, when we did a review, she said, Martine, I will always keep this coat for the rest of my life.
It reminds me of what I did. I think there's a lovely other bit in the book as well, when you talk about, you know, what victims can end up saying to themselves, like, I'm a resistor, or
yeah,
I would, whatever they say to themselves. But one of the things that came to my mind with a client that I was working with that refused to get married, is that she said, my resistance shows that I'm acting consistently with the person I've always been.
Yeah.
That's lovely, isn't it?
Yes. Because once you identify the axis, what do all these behaviors say about you? And we say, oh, I don't know. Well, let's think about this. You're determined, you're creative, you know, you are motivated, you make a stand, you are intent on speaking up, or you really care about you and your life and your well-being, and so on. And I think there's a page in the book of some of what the people tell me, what this resistance means about them.
Yeah, that's a really important part, isn't it? Kind of extrapolating that. Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Melanie. And Julia, you've got your hand up. Let's pass to you.
Yeah, so it's just something that's resonated. So thank you very much. I haven't read your book yet, but I'm going to buy it on Monday from Minster Centre. I'm new to therapy, so I manage a mental health organisation, but you've taken me back about 30 years as a health visitor in a London borough. And I remember helping a woman, I can still feel it quite here really, where she had 5 children taken into care. And then she had abuse from her partner. She was living on a really, really poor, isolated estate. And I remember supporting her into a women's refuge somewhere else in London with her baby. But of course, what happened was, unfortunately, was that she had been diagnosed with probably a bit of epilepsy and with diabetes, and the baby got taken into care. And so I think from the conversation that you've had and, you know, about that resistance, I can see the resistance and having more children, but actually she was really trying to take herself out of that situation. And I guess I just hope that the book gets shared with lots of other professionals, not just from a therapy side, because I'm spending a lot of time myself in my first few weeks at Minster Centre, really trying to tune in more to emotions and also less of the doing and more of the, and it's not like I've worked often with a lot of therapists, but I can see the thinking and the understanding is just so needs to be shared more broadly across the system.
Yeah,
It's
I
just the
agree.
thought that is.
Absolutely. Well, do pass on the book, obviously, but I teach as a goldsmith as well, and some social workers attend the course and other allied professions. I think lawyers need to know about things like that as well. And barristers were very interested in the website that I published called rapeisnotsex.com. And then barristers have been very interested in that. So yeah, totally pass it on. I think that's why I've written this book in that format, to reach as many people as possible, including as many professionals as possible as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you too.
Any other thoughts? Is that an old hand, Melody, or is that a new question?
You're still muted.
Oh, I think you're still muted. Old hand, I think.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts from anybody? Anything we'd like to ask? Let's ask then, if there isn't anything, to give people time to think. The chapter called "What You Have Been Told Is Wrong with You," which deals a lot with pathologizing. You've got a person comes to you and they say, "I'm drawn to abusive partners," and you unpack this case study in the book, and it's quite quite impacting. Could you share that one with us?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So again, I mean, when people arrive there, they say things are wrong with them for having had an abusive partner, or so they give themselves a lot of things wrong with them. And one of them is, I've had 2 abusive partners, so I attract them. There's something wrong with me. My psychology drives me to them. So there's a lot of self-blame and pathologizing. And so I think that's the story of Paul. I think I can't remember their names now. Is Paul and
yeah, that's right. It's Paul.
And who is the partner? Paul's partner. I can't remember now. Sean or so. Paul started a relationship and with I think Sean it was, and they really got on really well together, and they got really close, and they managed the difficulties well, and they really were in love, and they married 2 years on in the relationship. And then Paul's partner's parent died very shortly, one after the other, and Paul's partner started to really be extremely aggressive, and then it slowly increased his violence towards Paul. And at some point, Paul thought, okay, this is too dangerous. I need to leave. And it was heart-wrenching because there had been such a really good. They had had a good marriage. So altogether, before that went, I mean, it was like 4 years on. So they'd known each other a couple of years. They married. They had 2 good years, and then I think the parents died. So the partner became extremely violent. So Paul left, and it was really sad and difficult for him. And then a few months later, he wasn't quite ready for a relationship, but this guy was really keen on him, and I think it's George. And then he said, so they started dating. Even though Paul was just a bit slow and tentative. So they started dating. And George invited Paul at some point to play a tennis game. And in the changing room, George tried to rape Paul. And Paul managed to fight him off and flee. But obviously, he had been extremely scared. And he had a few bruises from resisting that rape. And then he avoided George ever afterwards, never went to party when George would be there, and avoided, the places where he would hang out. And so that was Paul's idea, that he had a pattern of abusive relationship. So when people talk about abusive relationship, and I think you mentioned that, Alex, abusive relationship is a mutual term. It's really making out that both people are abusive. Because if I said to you, John and Sarah have a loving relationship, you assume both people are loving. You don't assume that one is loving and the other one really cool and detached. So I don't use the term abusive relationship. People have an abusive partner, an abusive brother, an abusive wife, so we need to really be clearer about who is abusing whom. So I didn't correct Paul, I remember, because sometimes I just keep talking about abusive partner and not, I just don't join in, but I don't always challenge this expression of abusive relationship. But the premise was that he would have had to predict that his first love, Sean, would become abusive. So at the point of choosing him as a partner and then later on as a husband, he would have had to predict, if he were to choose abusive relationships, he would have had to predict 4 years ahead that, you know, Sean would become abusive as a result of a catastrophe in his life. That's not possible. That's not possible. And with George actually had been really charming and very nice. So Paul, again, would have had to predict a complete turnaround of behaviors. So this idea of predicting or choosing, you know, abusive partners is based on the assumption that unconsciously we can predict people will become that way. And I just, to me, it doesn't make sense. I don't think we have that power. I don't think our unconscious has that power. And often our perpetrators are very, very keen in hiding their intention to hurt and harm others. And they're going to be doing a good job of it. They're going to be doing a very good job of pretending to be kind, loving, and caring, even if they have negative, you know, intentions. So the whole idea of choosing partners which are abusive, also when you look at the beginning of relationship, they tend to be, these people tend to be very generous and kind and loving and romantic and so on. So it's impossible to say. It's only through time that you get to know their intention and their behavior changes. So I think with Paul, when I kind of demonstrated, well, how could you, you know, predict this? And at the end, I asked him, you know, would you have the relationship with Sean again if you could? And he thought a long time, and he said, yes, I would. And then I said, would you have the relationship with George? Oh, never. I mean, there were major differences in those two relationships. And to establish a pattern is more complex than just drawing a line between 2 points, you know. And did he ever think of saying he has a pattern of leaving abusive men? Because after all, he had left his first partner and he'd left his second partner. No, he had a pattern of leaving abusive men, not of choosing them, but leave them when they turned out to be abusive. So that's the way I would address that.
Thank you, Martine. It was impacting in the book. I remember underlining that sentence about pattern of leaving partners. Any final questions from anybody? It feels then like we might be naturally drawing to a close. I don't see any hands going up. Could we perhaps end here? So you've said, Martine, you kind of touched on it there. We've talked a lot about cases where clients have been talking to you about being abused and having that insight into it. You kind of end the book when you're talking about, you call the chapter "Those Who Abuse You," with the kind of, you know, the fact people can be very charming and kind of latch onto people in that way. And you end with this description of this term mature love, and maybe as a technique or a way of thinking to help identify when perhaps a relationship isn't the healthiest and it might not have occurred to somebody before then. Could we perhaps end on this sort of sharing with us mature love?
Yes, absolutely. And I think when I talk about perpetrators, I really want to acknowledge they have qualities and talents and skills, and they might also be very kind in some aspects of their behavior. So again, it's not totalizing the person. I think that's really important. I stumbled upon this piece of text by Milton Erickson in a book called Changing Couple. It's a very expensive book. And I think the best bit is the first page, which I share with the readers in the book. And it's a great book. So Milton Erickson was a psychiatrist and a hypnotherapist who worked in America. And he talks about, you know, the kind of love that's important in a good relationship, in a good intimate relationship. And a lot of my clients were asking, and when I did domestic abuse groups with women, they would say, well, what's love anyway? He would tell me he loved me, but then he treated me like this. So there was a real questions and wish of finding answers about how do you actually know someone loves you when they tell you they love you and they treat you like this, but then some other days they are very gentle and what's going on here. And so I began to share this piece of text by Milton Erickson and to talk about it. So Milton Erickson says that in a good relationship, you need 4 kinds of love. So he talks about the infant love, which is I love me. And you need a little bit of that in a good relationship. I love me. You need a little bit of that in each person. Then he talks about the infant love, which is I love you because you're my daddy, my uncle, my mommy. So, and it says it's like I love the me in you. I think therapists might understand that maybe a bit more easily than, so I love the me in you. I love you because you're mine. So you need a little bit of that in a good relationship. Then he says you need a little bit of adolescent love. And adolescent love is I love you because the way you dance pleases me, because of your sense of humor pleases me, because your good brain pleases me. Yes, and you need a little bit of that kind of love in a good relationship. And then he says you need a big, big, big dose in both people of what he calls mature love. And mature love is I delight in your happiness. I will do all I can to give you the space and the ability to be happy. I will not stand in the way of your happiness, and I will try to facilitate your happiness. Not that I can make you happy, but I certainly can make sure that you can be as happy as you can be. Yeah, it's a very important difference. And he gives the example, it's a bit dated because he wrote this in the 50s, but he gives the example of the wife who remembers all the favorite actors and all the favorite movies her husband's like. And she doesn't like the Westerns that he loves, but she makes sure he watches them on television and she sits near him. She doesn't like the movies. She knits while he's watching it, but she really enjoys his enjoyment because she can see it. He's enjoying the movies and she gets something pleasant about it. And so when I ask, a lot of victims, so male victims as well as women, did your partner or husband ever show mature love? And you can guess the answer. That's a big, big no. No. When I was happy, he was grumpy. He had a headache. I would come back from the party. He was too tired to talk about it. So next day, he never asked. Yeah, so there's, we'd go for holidays. He would lose the passports. So everything seems to be, geared towards suppressing or impinging upon someone's happiness. There is no delight. A lot of perpetrators do not delight into their partner's happiness. Your manager, if you show pride in your work, they're not going to be proud with you. So you may call that envy, you may call that something else, but I think I wanted to share this because I think this is something you can spot even in early stages of a relationship, even when you date. And I give a personal example where I was dating someone who definitely was not enjoying my enjoyment or sharing any fun and joy that I had. And thanks to this text, I just thought, no, I'm out of here, because every time I show joy, he's going to be unhappy. I'm going to end up not showing joy. The same way that every time I cracked a joke with a previous boyfriend, he didn't laugh. I stopped cracking jokes. So this love is based on, obviously, people expressing their delight, but the other person loving back by enjoying that delight, by delighting in the pleasure and happiness of their partner. So, I think a lot of my clients that I share that with, they find that really important and valuable. And often they talk about, how do I date someone again? Because this guy was really nice, or this woman was really nice, and then they turn like this. How will I know next time around? It's not that easy. And I think they've been thinking of using the mature love, and showing happiness and joy. And what does this person, handle it? How do they respond? And sometimes they have found that there was not much delight into their enjoyment and happiness. So it's it's my experience. It's not a proper study. It's not a proper piece of research. But I have seen really hundreds of cases in all the organizations I worked for, really quite a few hundred cases. And I've never met someone who said their partner showed mature love. A little bit at the beginning, but it never stayed. They showed a little bit of pleasure, but it didn't last. So that's, I don't know. There's a correlation there. I don't know. I think that's really interesting. What do you think? Everyone.
Makes perfect sense to me.
Right.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah. Thinking of my client as well. Yeah. It's quite sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I'm thinking of that boyfriend I had, everything was, it was a real potential long-term relationship. He was charming, he opened the car doors, he treated me to restaurants, and I mean, it was just really good on the books. But it was 1998, and we watched France winning the World Cup. And, I just stood and said, yeah! And he stayed on the sofa saying, oh gosh, I'll never hear the end of that. France was playing Brazil. This guy wasn't Brazilian. He didn't have any Brazilian family. He was English. He could not rejoice in France winning the World Cup with me. But, my friends, they said, oh, but, he's so nice in so many other ways. No,
Thank you.
Not nice enough. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for sharing with us, Martine. And that the book is around about 200 pages, I think.
Yeah.
But it does have lots of points like that where you kind of stop and think. It's not a kind of quick read, half an hour, yet done, bang. It's I was thinking about that mature love thing for some time after reading it. So thank you for giving your evening to us, and also for donating or letting us sort of put that money towards the Student Hardship Fund. That was very generous. Mm-hmm. I'm going to stop recording in a moment, some things to quickly share with you before we go. So reception will send... Oh, sorry, Martine.
No, I think, Andy, you asked me a question before we didn't prepare extensively the meeting, but you said, what is the message of the book, if you were to put that in one sentence? And it was really helpful because I thought about that. And I think the book advocates for us to respect victims, to really deeply respect victims with kindness, to treat them with respect and to treat them with kindness. I think that's the message of the book. So I just wanted to maybe conclude on that.
I think that's a very important note to end on. Thank you. On the housekeeping, so CPD certificates will be sent out by reception early next week. Martine is going to run a short course in June and one session in July on this topic. So we'll share with everybody in the meeting information about that in the coming weeks if it is something that interests you. Martine also gives supervision on this approach. So if that is something that interests you, I'm going to include her contact details in some materials I'll send you on Tuesday, including a quick survey about how you found this. The video will appear as soon as I close the link in your chat, I think, automatically. But we'll sort of like crop one down and tidy one up to put on the Minster Centre's YouTube channel. So that will be appearing there as well. If you do read Martine's book and enjoy it,
let me know.
Yeah, first of all, let me know if you like that. And I hear it's good if you pop a review on Amazon as well. I hear that helps authors. So if you have a couple of minutes to do that and feel comfortable doing that, then that'd be a great help to her. Otherwise, thank you for coming. Thank you for tolerating my relentless emails, reminding you of the times and the links and all the rest of that. I'm going to end the recording now, and then we can wish Martine well for the rest of her evening and say goodbye to each other.